So, hi everybody, welcome to this session. This is part of the National Day of Action for Higher Education, which is put together by the Coalition for, this is going to be a lot of words, a lot of acronyms, the Coalition for Action in Higher Education, CAHI, which is a partnership of a bunch of different organizations. It started mainly between AUP chapters and local organizers, and I'm with Higher Education Labor United, which is one of the main organizing groups as well. We've got a lot of things going on today. We've got 200 events, more than 200 events in person and online. We're really thankful that you are all here and that you chose to be with us today. And I just wanted to welcome everybody and say welcome not just to this webinar, to this session, but to this movement that I think we can all feel growing. And I'm really happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Hi, everyone. My name is Naomi Paik, and I'm here with the Sanctuary Campus Network. I'm broadcasting from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and I'm so glad to be with you here for this crucial session on immigrant defense. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers who are incredibly busy and yet took the time and thoughtfulness to bring their insights to us as we try to navigate our quickly changing and escalating political moment. So I'll just introduce them. I might put some links in the chat where you can support the work that they do as well. So we have Marie Mark, who is an attorney who has been working to defend immigrant rights for over 15 years. We have Mizuya Zeke, who is an organizer who has been working to defend rights at the intersection of the criminal, legal, and immigration systems for more than 15 years. And we have Gita Schwartz, who has been a civil and human rights litigator for more than 15 years, focusing on the rights of immigrants. So I'm going to turn it over to Mizue Azeke. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, let me also say that you are welcome to ask questions at any time. Please do not use the chat for questions. Please use the Q&A function. I will be going through the Q&A, and if there are questions that are asked multiple times, we'll prioritize those. But please use the Q&A function for any questions at any time during the session. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Are you all seeing the slideshow? Gita, you're the only face I can see. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks so much to all of you for attending, for all the work you do, and for continuing care about people and human beings and the world that we want to live in. Again, my name is Mizue, and I'm just going to open up this presentation with a really brief, very brief reflection on how we got here, but then also turn it over to Marie and Gita to give us some grounding in some of the laws and the rights and the things, yes, sorry, as it relates to ICE policing practices in this moment. So here we are. Like I said, I'm going to talk about how we got here, then we're going to go over the state of the law and then rights and opportunities, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And part of the reason why I'm going to speak fairly fast is because we want to give you as much opportunity to ask questions as possible. So just to ground us in who these law enforcement agencies are, as a reminder, this moment is as unique and extreme as it is a part of a continuum. An important part of this continuum was the founding of DHS in 2002 after 9/11, where this idea of a particular idea of securing the nation included a substantial amount of resources dedicated to building up a substantial policing force. DHS consolidated 22 agencies, pre-existing agencies, into a massive agency which oversaw things, ranging from FEMA, right, emergency relief, to naturalization, to obviously, as we know, policing, detention, and border policing. So as the Customs and Border Protection, the Border Patrol predated DHS, but it has grown substantially since. And the policing agency that was set up as part of DHS is called ICE. It includes a section that's dedicated to arresting and detaining people and deporting them, as well as HSI, which is historically tasked with criminal investigations related to things such as what are they called? Goods, counterfeit goods, drugs, that kind of thing. And one of the things that we have seen increasingly is the recruitment of all sorts of policing agencies, is what they call as force multipliers. And they look, you can see, you know, ICE will often wear these kinds of jackets as police and ICE. Sometimes they do plain clothes. Sometimes we see Border Patrol, you know, operating deep in the interior, like we did in New York and Chicago in 2020, supporting ICE operations. Sometimes we see the FBI and these joint task forces, as well as U.S. Marshals, and just, you know, something that really increased after the founding of DHS was the expansion of immigration policing into domestic policing. And this took place in the form of automatic data sharing of fingerprints at the point of booking, but also, as we know, agreements such as 287G agreements where regular police or domestic police were signed agreements with ICE to conduct immigration, you know, operate as immigration agents either on the street or in the jails. And those agreements are proliferating. And just in terms of this point around securing the nation, you know, I think there is a uniqueness to this moment, as I said, but also grounded in a continuum of deportation and wide-scale surveillance and policing being used to police suppressed dissent and labor organizing or racial justice organizing, as well as reinforcing hierarchies of belonging. And I just wanted to bring us up to the current in the sense of things that I think, well, I know are very foundational to this moment. The wide-scale transformation of the immigration laws in 1996, kind of in the context of the war on crime, the war on the poor, but where terrorism and the language around terrorism and illegality really became concretized in certain ways in a legal framework that both minimized people's due process rights and also made it much more difficult for people to get a pathway to legal status, but very much entangling the criminal legal system with the immigration system, along with ideas of criminality and non-deservingness. That was very fast, but just to this moment, thinking about how is it then you can have both a series of ideas that reinforces hierarchies of belongings and politics associated with it, then a foundation of laws that make it extremely difficult for people to have, you know, to win the right to be regarded as legal or of some kind of permanent status here. And then you have, after the founding of DHS, the buildup of a massive apparatus and the investment of a tremendous amount of resources into border policing, both in the United States, but also globally, and as well as internal policing. So that's just a snapshot, but you know, I say it as a way, this is probably not new information to many people, but for people like me and maybe some of the others on this call who've been doing this work for a while, to see how this has built up, you know, 20 years might seem like a long time, but it's actually not that long, right? And it's quite remarkable to see how you know, this idea of like the criminal alien and now the enemy alien and the extent to which it's kind of impacting governance is pretty profound. And so I just wanted to open there with a grounding that is something that could build up so quickly is also something that we have to see as abnormal as it is, despite how much they want us to, how much it's seemingly been normalized. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Marie.
Thanks, Pazue. Hi, everyone. I am going to talk about kind of risks and liabilities, both related to criminal prosecution and immigration risks that I think go into and should go into the kinds of organizing that folks can be doing on campuses against the current kind of regime of mass deportation And I want to start with this individualized risk assessment piece. And I'll just say, I think I speak for Geeta as well, that while we are lawyers, we are not your lawyers. And so, you know, everything we're talking about here is kind of general information terms and is not individualized legal advice to any of you. And I say that both as like a blanket warning, but also because that's kind of key to the way that I'm actually thinking about how folks are doing individualized risk assessment at this very moment, right? So when I think about individuals' risks, I think about the risks of criminal prosecution, but there are levels to the criminal risks that can come from conduct. Folks can be just investigated, and that's very invasive at times, right? People can be charged and prosecuted, and even without a conviction, that can also be invasive and stressful, in addition to the question of whether or not somebody's ever convicted or sentenced in related to a criminal charge. And so similarly, when we're thinking about immigration risks, of course, it depends on status, but there's a wide range of things that could be happening. A person's visa could be revoked. A person could be denied an application for a green card or naturalization. We're seeing people be detained, people can be deported, and all of those things are like the different kinds of risks that can happen based on conduct and in some cases, the way in which people are organizing. And so it's important to think about these risks actually as individualized and work individualized risk assessment into any organizing scheme that you're doing. I think also important to say, and I think this is a little highlighted by some of the stuff Mzue was talking about, is that there is an overlap of the criminal and immigration systems, which means that people who are not US citizens are at added risk of anything that's related to potential criminal conduct, because there can be added on penalties for immigrants after even an arrest or investigation. And then I think broadly examining the landscape of where we are right now in 2025, the thing that I'm keeping an eye on, and I'm encouraging others to keep an eye on, is the difference between the targeting of individuals for penalty and investigation based on a factual basis. And so what does that mean when I say that? Because it sounds like super lawyerly. Investigation based on a factual basis looks like what we've long seen now, a long-standing practice of reviewing criminal records for people at the point of an immigration application to identify if they're eligible for a benefit, right? That's an investigation based on a factual basis. Targeting is different. Targeting is the government digging into an individual's past to identify something on which to base consequences. So it's more outcome oriented, right? We are seeing individuals having their visas revoked at this point. Some folks would say that that is outcome oriented. Another hypothetical example that is grounded in history is think about civil rights leaders in the South during the 60s driving in their car and cops pulling them over because they'd been following them for a long time, waiting for them to make some kind of traffic infraction, right? That's the kind of individualized targeting that looks really different, and I think will make you organize differently and think about your risk differently. So if we could go on to the first slide, I think one of the things I want to just, before I get into the super scary, you could be arrested for different things, I want to just talk about some of the organizing and safety planning that folks are doing right now that I think is like absolutely essential to any kind of organizing scheme. So we're seeing lots of know your rights education, and I want to just be clear that educating people about the Constitution and their rights under the Constitution is lawful conduct that is socially good and people should be doing, right? There are a lot of resources out there to help folks, even if they're not lawyers, do that work. And I think like in some cases, it's even better when it's not lawyers doing that work, right? This is our Constitution that we live under, and it shouldn't be lawyers who are the only people who understand it. The other thing is the institutional advocacy that I suspect many of you are already involved in for things like privacy protections for students and faculty, sensible codes of conduct, support for immigrant students or students who are on foreign visas. You know, that kind of advocacy within your organization is very unlikely to be like venturing into the territory of this criminal or immigration liability that I'm talking about. And then I think the last thing that I really want to spend a little more time on is this idea of safety planning at the individual level. And I want to just emphasize that in some spaces, what we're seeing right now is safety planning that's very effective because it goes beyond an individual's legal needs. So, what is safety planning? I'm using safety planning as a broad term that includes developing a community of care around people who are vulnerable proactively. So it's important to understand this because detention is powerful in part because it's a tactic that disappears and erases individuals from their communities. And so you can think of safety planning as a means of counteracting that disappearance at the individual level. I'm going to just give a few examples of what this looks like, but I want to say again that this is something that it's individualized, right? So it can look like in preparation before there's any kind of contact with immigration, talking with people who are legally vulnerable to make sure that they have a legal consult to understand their risks and what their options may be. Um, Helping people fill out financial and childcare directives so that in the event that they're removed from their community, their children are taken care of and they know where their kids are, right? Somebody has access to funds if they need someone to have access to their money. Other things to think about are things like a communication plan, and communication plan can be big. I could say, look, if I'm arrested, I want you to go to the press, and these are the things I want you to talk to them about. And these are the things I'm not comfortable with you talking to the press about. Or it could be small, like I want you to call my mom, even though she's in Chile, right? Like communication plans are really about like who knows what when. I think on an ongoing basis, we're seeing some folks plan around companionship, so ensuring that people are not alone at times where they might be vulnerable, and that there will be a witness if somebody is forcibly detained. And then there are some logistical planning, right? Like who should we call if you're detained? Where are your documents and who has access to them? Where are your car keys? What bills will continue to need to be paid and how's that going to happen? Some of those real concerns that like make it so that you're very much saying like you won't disappear for us, right? We are planning for your presence. And then after somebody is arrested, there's still work that can be done. So I think one thing to just be very clear about, I think a lot of people know this, but in immigration proceedings, people are not entitled to a free attorney the way that they are in criminal proceedings. So while you have a right to be represented, you're not given a right to be represented at no cost. And so ensuring that people have access to legal counsel in proceedings, especially where the immigration law was already very complicated. The changes now, I think, are making it even more difficult for people to navigate. This is a really useful, proactive safety measure that you can provide for people. Other things to think about are that often people who don't have immigration status are really afraid to go visit their loved ones who are in custody. And that's because going to one of those detention centers might put the loved one at risk, and nobody wants everybody to be swept up into this system. And so thinking about who can visit so that people have that kind of contact, and also how you're going to help fund commissary so that people can make phone calls and have the things that they need in detention. Detention is deliberately unpleasant as a way to force people to give up, right? And so funding someone's commissary can be an act of resistance. And then I think the unfortunate truth is that people are being detained and deported. We're deporting thousands, hundreds of thousands of people per year. And it's important to also be thinking about deportation planning. So making sure that people are able to get their belongings, that their lives are, the chaos that this creates in people's lives is minimized to whatever extent is possible. If you can go to the next slide, I'm going to talk now about kind of some of the potential liability and risk. You've heard me talk a little bit already about immigration. We're seeing an expansion of the grounds that are used to charge people who already have status as deportable. And so we're seeing that in terms of expanded use of national security, both as a justification for deportation and as a justification for detention for people while they are fighting their deportation, far beyond what was ever normal before. At the same time, I think we have to keep a perspective, right? There are 12.8 permanent residents estimated to be living in the country. That was as of January of last year, right? There's a lot of people. And so while it's important to plan, we also have to understand that right now, most residents are not deportable, right? Most people are going to be fine. Some of the reports are that removals are actually lower than they were under the Biden administration. And there are fewer people who are newly being put into deportation proceedings than there were under the Biden administration. But the kind of the press and the kind of notoriety and the flashiness of these actions has clearly grown, and the number of people in detention has clearly grown. So I don't want to say that people who are, I used to be able to say if you have a green card, right? Unless you've got a criminal conviction, you're probably okay. And I don't say that anymore, but I want to say, I'm not saying that anymore, but with a grain of salt, because actually we're not seeing that kind of targeting in the huge numbers that it may seem like we are based on the amount of press that there is. The second group of people are people who I think of as in status that's more at the discretion of the federal government alone. So that's people who have things like temporary protected status, DACA, people who are on visas. And these are statuses that there's litigation about. The administration is really trying to end these statuses, rescind people's ability to be here as much as possible. And so that creates a level of risk for those individuals. And then, of course, we have people who don't have any immigration status right now. Immigration status is fluid, so people can have status and then lose it and gain it and lose it again, right? But if at this very moment a person doesn't have status, even if they have, a pending application or an expired visa, that puts them at a high level of risk. I'm going to talk mainly about criminal liability here because the way that I approached this was to think about what are the categories of criminal liability that would be useful for you to be aware of as you're thinking about how to organize support on campus, on a campus community. And I think there's I'll say to start, again, not your attorney, this is not legal advice to you. And part of that is because there's not one national definition of any of the things I'm about to talk about. So I was like very excited to see all the people in the chat say, I'm from Michigan, I'm from Wisconsin, I'm from Ohio, I'm from New Jersey, right? But that does mean that the person in Ohio is dealing actually with a different interpretation of the law than a person in New Jersey. And so what I want to try and point you to here are the basic concepts, and also in some cases, the kind of attorney who might understand that in your jurisdiction, in the place where you are, so that they can provide you with more detailed and individualized advice about any kind of organizing that you're trying to do. So I'm first going to talk about the federal prohibitions against harboring and related statutes that cover transportation, smuggling, and inducing immigrants to come to the United States. All of these require knowledge, right? So one of the foundational elements that has to be proven if somebody is going to be convicted of harboring is that they either knew or had a reckless disregard for the fact that somebody was without status. And so because of this, programs that are not necessarily only aimed at people who are out of status are less likely to be interpreted as intended to protect or lure people who don't have status, right? So opening any kind of organizing you're doing to a wider range of people can be useful. There are prohibitions against hiding or aiding immigrants in some circumstances. But for the most part, these are intended to prohibit targeted assistance to evade law enforcement or detection of people that, again, you know to be without status. So this is not about like, I can't let my friend stay in my guest bedroom for a night because they're in New York, right? It's really intended to be about this kind of purposeful conduct. If you're worried about any of these kinds of things around kind of like, can I let someone stay here? Am I worried about whether this kind of assistance is going to be considered to be aiding someone? The folks to talk to are people who understand federal criminal law in your part of the country, right? So I'm in New York. In New York, we're in the Second Circuit. But if I were in Florida, Florida's in the 11th Circuit, right? So you're going to just be looking for people who are in your specific area of the country. And specifically, these are things that are prosecuted by the federal government. So you're looking for people who understand federal law. There are also prohibitions against transportation in the federal law. The federal transportation prohibitions require a connection with furthering an individual's unlawful presence in the United States. So again, there's some room for disagreement among the courts here. So you're going to talk to somebody who understands federal criminal law in the place where you are to understand exactly how that's being interpreted. But here I want to also flag that there are some states that have recently passed laws that are related to transportation. And so if you're in a state where there's a criminal law that is related to transportation, and many of these passed as kind of shadow versions of the federal law intended to make life difficult for people who are undocumented, you want to talk to people who understand state criminal defense. So if you're not in a state that has a state transportation law aimed at undocumented people, you can talk to just the federal folks. But if you're in one of the states that has passed a law that's related to transportation of undocumented folks, then you want to also be talking to folks who understand state criminal law. The next one in terms of the federal laws is usually about smuggling, right? So smuggling is bringing someone from another country into the United States. And I think that this is something where it's very easy. You just want to be talking to an immigration attorney about how people can bring their loved ones to reunite with them in the United States. It is not illegal to help somebody lawfully come to the United States. There are pathways for that, and there are people who are doing that even today. But you want to make sure that if you're trying to help people reunite with their loved ones, you're watching out for the fact that doing it outside of those lawful pathways can put you at risk. The next set of things I want to talk to you about is around speaking to law enforcement. I'll get to that slide in just a minute. I know I'm a little over time. Speaking to law enforcement, and I wouldn't be a good attorney if I didn't say you shouldn't be talking to law enforcement unless you have your lawyer present, right? And what I always say to people, if law enforcement wants to talk to you, you say, yeah, I'd love to talk to you with my lawyer present, right? Lying to law enforcement is a huge risk. It is illegal. Making threats to law enforcement in some circumstances can expose you to criminal liability. So when you're speaking with law enforcement, the best thing always is to be very clear that you want to do that only with your lawyer present. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is around obstruction and your right to record. And so I'm pushing into Geeta's section a little bit here, but I want to just emphasize that recording immigration enforcement actions or immigration policing actions is legal as long as you don't interfere. And so what that means is that you can very openly record. You want to be careful in terms of the fact that these agents carry guns with them, right? They are armed law enforcement. And so you want to first be aware of your safety and your surroundings. It can be dangerous to your personal safety to reach into your pocket for a phone if they're going to interpret that or choose to interpret that as a potential threat to their own safety because they're armed law enforcement. But if you can record, you want to do that openly, very clearly. They can tell that you're recording, but you cannot get in their way, right? That's kind of the balance. If you can't record, it's okay, right? Like we were able to document things before all of us had recording on our phones, right? You could take a picture. You can also just write things down immediately afterwards and send it to yourself in your email or send it to a person who's connected to the person who was detained. We can go to the next slide. When you're thinking about what it is you want to record, you want to identify where and when the encounter happened. Was it with ICE or other agents? Did people have insignia on their clothes that helped you understand who they were? How many ICE officers were there? Or how many officers in general? how did they identify themselves? What did they say? And very important, and gets really into what Geeta is going to talk about, is this question of did they give consent? And I know that this is like, oh my gosh, there's so many questions. We've got a resource on this, so you don't have to memorize it or write it down. We have a resource. This is a great poster that was created by the Immigrant Defense Project that includes a list of questions on the back and your rights on the front, right? So I think the last piece that I just want to say about this, and then I'll turn it over to Geeta, is that you want to be responsible with this recording or photos or your documentation in the aftermath. I think sometimes we see folks feel like I'm really outraged by this horrible thing that happened, and so I'm going to put it on social media because everyone needs to see this. That might not be the best thing for the person who's been arrested and is now at risk of being deported. So the best thing to do is to work with that person's attorney or a local immigrant organizing group to understand what's the best way to use this information that you have to that person's benefit. And you don't want to expose people, especially on social media, without their permission. So with that, I'll turn it over to Geeta to talk more about your kind of active rights that you can use.
Thank you, Marie. So I'm going to talk, I hope briefly, because I know we want to get to your questions on what are your rights and what are opportunities to exercise your rights, depending on whether you are a professor, employer, student, resident of a home. And generally, this is going to be about what can law enforcement do under the U.S. Constitution, and what can you, a regular person, do and what can you exercise to make sure those rights make sense. And generally, what we're going to cover is the Fourth Amendment. That's the main amendment that we're going to look at. That's the amendment that protects your right against unreasonable searches and seizures, meaning seizures and searches that are done without a warrant or without other kinds of circumstances. We'll touch on, but not discuss in depth, the Fifth Amendment, which gives you the right to due process that we've talked about a lot in the news lately, the right to equal protection, and the right against self-incrimination. We'll probably say it a couple more times during this presentation. Maria's already said it. Never, never lie to law enforcement. You don't have to. You don't have to say anything. That's what the right against self-incrimination is for. And all of these very quick summaries that we're doing are really focusing on what can you do? What can you do with these rights? How is that knowledge going to affect you in the moment? So on the next slide, just the basics of the Bill of Rights. Non-citizens generally enjoy the Bill of Rights, and they have First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment rights. That means that they are entitled to free speech, free assembly. They're entitled to be safe from unreasonable search and seizure. They're entitled to due process and equal protection, often to a slightly lesser degree than citizens, but they have those rights. And that's where we're seeing a lot of pushback and attack happening from the federal government now. Immigration violations are typically civil violations, not criminal. Typically, you're not going to be prosecuted for being out of status. But in many circumstances, what that means is that your rights are lessened because the highest rights that you enjoy are typically when you are being criminally prosecuted. So it's a little bit of a short stick in many circumstances. Law enforcement agencies, the police, the FBI, and ICE, all law enforcement agencies, must have a judicial warrant that is supported by probable cause in order to enter private areas of a business or a home. Without a judicial warrant, something signed by a judge, they need consent. They need consent from someone who has power over that space. Typically, in the criminal context, most law enforcement needs probable cause of a crime to arrest. But people who are being arrested by immigration authorities need probable cause only that you may be subject to removal in order to make an arrest, meaning that you are foreign born, and that your status may subject you, your status and some other circumstances may subject you to removal or deportation. These rights are on paper, but all of us have to exercise the rights for them to be meaningful. And exercising those rights actually does make a difference, and I'll get to that on the next slide. In practice, almost all of the time, ICE and immigration enforcement agencies generally don't have judicial warrants to enter or search a private space. They almost never have that. They have something they call an administrative warrant or have some other words for, but almost never do they have a warrant that is signed by a judge to enter or search. That means that unless there's some kind of an emergency, without that warrant, they need your consent to enter your home, to enter your office, and to do a search of those places. If you are living with someone who may have uncertain status, you are not obliged to open the door if there is no judicial warrant. You don't have to talk to them. You don't have to answer any questions. You don't have to let them search. We're going to see a couple of videos where people are acting very calmly and appropriately with agents in order to in order to exercise their rights. It's very important that trying to escape can in and of itself put people in danger and can give law enforcement a pretext to detain you because that might become an emergency circumstance. Agents may and do use ruses to disguise why they want to enter, search, or talk. I just want to make sure that you're okay. I'm here just to check check if things are up to code. You want to know if you're talking to a law enforcement agent that they have a warrant that is signed by a judge before you let them in. Never lie to law enforcement. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to explain why you're not saying anything. You just never want to lie to a law enforcement agent because that in itself can trigger some criminal liability. I'm ready for the next slide. What gives you more rights under the Fourth Amendment? What is a private space? What is a public space? In a private space, as we've said, agents need a judicial warrant or consent to enter or search. That means a home, including an area where it looks like you have an expectation of privacy, like a fenced-in backyard. Parts of workplaces that seem private, like professors' offices, and closed property. They need a warrant for that or your consent. In public, they need less than that. That means if you're walking on the street or driving or riding in a car, they can talk to you, they can briefly detain you if they believe there's reasonable suspicion that you are removable if you're an immigrant or that you've committed a crime or a crime is taking place. For their own safety, they can also pat you down. They can't go inside your pockets. I'm going to go to the next slide. And I'm going to show a couple of videos where in one case, an attorney, and in another case, a construction worker are exercising their rights because they understand that officers need their consent. And we're going to look at these very short videos to see, what is it that people are doing that are making a difference when officers are seeking consent. So let's go to the first video, which is from just a couple of weeks ago.
What's going on?
This is the moment lawyer James Rivera and a paralegal rushed to the home of their client, a 19-year-old green card applicant in Sterling, Virginia. The woman who arrived in America as an unaccompanied minor years prior was not home, according to her lawyer.
All right, what's going on?
Someone in the house called Rivera when 5 officials showed up unexpectedly on the doorstep.
On the scene, I said, I've never had this happen, ever. They don't go to homes to do welfare checks.
Who do y'all represent? I'm the family lawyer here.
Okay, I guess my deputy.
Yeah, do you?
Yeah.
Okay, who do you represent?
HSI.
I think that's the strategy. I don't have a uniform on. You don't see ICE or HSI. I'm just here to check on you. I'm your friend. By the way, let me in. Let me see what you got going on in here.
Yeah.
We're looking for Amy.
For what?
We're doing a welfare check on her to make sure she's doing okay. That's
What's
it's
what?
all part of-
What's the
listen,
basis?
Listen, I can tell you.
Okay.
You're recording this, aren't you?
Yeah.
In February, Reuters obtained an internal memo from the Trump administration directing immigration agents in the U.S. to track down and deport thousands of migrant children who entered the country without parents.
This person has been to court, waiting on her green card. There's no requirement that an unaccompanied minor check in unless they're told to do so. There's no order indicating that she needs to do that or that she's missed any court dates, nothing. The questions I asked, I think that let them know that whatever they thought was going to happen, it wasn't going to happen. Not today.
Perfect. We still need to talk to her.
Okay. I can set up an appointment at my office. We can do that.
It's perfectly fine. You got a card?
Nah, but I can give you my name and number.
Again, you need to talk to the sponsor. And
Okay, so now you need to talk to the sponsor too. You say you need to talk to her. Now, who you need to talk to, so I can set you up. Because I'm trying to prevent you all from coming back into this neighborhood.
So that's a very recent example of, as you can see, Homeland Security investigations, a branch of ICE. Those officers are dressed in ordinary people clothes, you know, a hoodie, just checking on the wellness of someone who came in as an unaccompanied minor and is going through the lawful process to get status. They're using that wellness check to see if family members will let them in. And in this case, a lawyer, but an ordinary person too, can say, no, if you don't have consent to do it, make an appointment. We'll talk to you later. They're exercising their completely valid Fourth Amendment rights to not have the officer come in and answer questions without an attorney present. I'm going to go to the next video. This is a video of something that took place in 2017.
We don't need a warrant to come in his home. No one lives here.
You do need it. We talk to the homeowner. We work with the homeowner.
Listen, I know that no one lives here. This is considered a place of business. You guys are here to work.
They live downstairs. Everything is downstairs. Their furniture is everything downstairs. The big home. We're finishing up so they can come back up. Her vehicle's right outside. I think you guys need to speak with her before you guys even come in here.
That's fine.
I mean, honestly, I don't think you guys should even be in here. You're basically trespassing at this moment, right now.
Okay, we asked to speak with him, and you showed us in. First of all,
I opened the door. I never told you to come in.
okay, listen,
I opened the door.
I don't want to get into it with you. I
That's
just
fine.
need to come in and talk to him.
I'm just letting you know that right now you guys are trespassing at this very moment. This is somebody's home. We're working here, yes.
Right.
But it is vacated. It's here. That people are living here.
Where?
Her vehicle is right outside. The Tahoe?
That's theirs.
Yes. So you guys are currently trespassing at this moment. So if you guys don't have a warrant, you're kind of breaking the law.
As you know, Marie and Mizue, who I've worked with on this video many times, know I love this video because it is an ordinary person, not an attorney, a colleague of a man that's being targeted, saying, you need a warrant to come in here. Even if you're already here, I don't give consent for you to remain. You have to go to the person who has authority to give consent, the homeowner. You know, he's doing all these things that that show he knows the law, he knows his rights, and the ICE agents are actually listening. The video does end with the person they're looking for being arrested. He was eventually released. But that kind of behavior and discussion really does make a difference to ICE. They hear it. They often do understand when someone knows the law that they're going to be held accountable to it. The reason we are seeing so many arrests on the street and in public is because ICE is aware that people know that you can't come into their homes without a warrant. They're arresting people in lobbies, on the street, in public spaces, because they're aware that many people are educated about their ability to say no to ICE without getting in trouble. I do want to say, Is there anything the community member could have done differently?
What's going on?
This is the moment lawyer
I think you can hear the man in the video saying, I opened the door. I didn't tell you to come in. He probably does wish he never opened the door and talked through the door to him. It's very, very hard to do that in the moment. But he's trying to repair that by saying, I no longer consent to you being here. You can withdraw consent at any time. They may not listen, but it's absolutely worth stating it because it can be helpful to you later on. If they don't follow the law, I don't consent. Please leave. I don't consent. I don't want to answer. If you're outside and you're stopped, am I free to go? I don't want to answer. I'm going to go quickly to the next slide. These are just a few resources that we want you to be aware of. The President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration has a really thorough guide for campus communities, and it also stays up to date on all the executive orders that are coming out about requirements to register and things like that. The other resources we have here are guides for employers, guides for what to do if an agent knocks. That's a really helpful resource. And a guide for nonprofits who work with immigrants and what they can do. And on the next page, we have some Know Your Rights materials that are linked, that are primarily provided by the Immigrant Defense Project. And I'm going to close it off for questions. Thanks, Ms. Zue, for doing the slides.
Okay, thank you all so much. That was so much information and it was so powerful and so helpful. And I really appreciate some of the things that I learned were about the protections around harboring, I think was very helpful for us. So thank you so much for leveling up our knowledge base. We have a lot of questions. We have 9 minutes. So there was a batch of questions about this question over public and private space on campus. Is a locked door enough to signify a private space? There are certain classrooms and certain admin offices are not obviously public or private. So what is the legal status of those? Kind of similar to like a grad student office. That's also people can flow in and out of those. What is the legal basis for public versus private on campus? There were like 5 or 6 questions about this.
Should I answer that, Maria? Yeah. So it is a spectrum, and there is no hard and fast rule, which I'm sure people hear lawyers saying a lot. But generally, you want to think of, is there an expectation of privacy? So a lock on something should signify an expectation of privacy. It doesn't really matter if you're a grad student or a professor or a custodial employee. If you have a space that is yours and that you have control over and you have an expectation of privacy there, that should be an area where you need to give consent for someone to enter or search. Classroom generally is going to be a more public kind of setting. An office is generally going to be a more private kind of setting. A public bathroom is probably a public kind of setting. So it's really context specific, but the general idea is where there's a clear and obvious expectation of privacy, consent is needed from someone who has authority over the space. If I am a landlord, I don't have the authority to enter my tenant's apartment at any time that I wish. I need their permission generally. I can't give consent for my tenant's apartment to be searched. The tenant needs to do that. And that sort of expectation of privacy carries over into lots of contexts.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I think that's helpful. I'll just say for my classrooms, no outsiders are allowed into my class unless they're invited. So if someone were to knock on my classroom door, I would just say, you're not invited and please go away. But the legal thing. Okay, we have a batch of questions, as you know, around the student visa revocations. So if a student visa is being revoked, are they are they considered in deportation, or are these two separate things? We are hearing a lot of conflicting information. What can be done about a student whose status has been arbitrarily terminated? And does any of the information that you have provided us in this workshop, does it differ for folks who have had their status just revoked recently?
Do you want me to talk about that, Ethan? So I think probably people are hearing lots of conflicting information because this really does need to be an individualized analysis based on how a person's visa was revoked, what kind of visa they had, what was the what their entry requirements were. Like there are things that happen when people first enter the United States that can be determinative here. And so I think really the best thing to think about is like, how can we help, right? Like, how can we ensure that people who are here on a student visa have access to some kind of legal consult before there's any kind of revocation? How can we help people who there has been a revocation access some kind of counsel to do an individualized analysis? It's very, very hard to do kind of like broad strokes. I can say, right, how someone entered the US is going to make a difference. What kind of visa they have is going to make a difference. What the grounds are for revoking their visa is going to make a difference. And what we've even seen is that some people who, even if you say I'm on a student visa, right, folks can be on a student visa and be a student. They can be in a training period after they've graduated for a year. Folks who are STEM majors can be on a training program even after that first training period, right? And the options for people in all of those different statuses are also differ. And so I think what I've seen locally is a lot of the schools that have a connection to a law school on their campus have recruited law professors from the campus to start doing some of these individual advisals and trying to advocate within the university to try and get those kinds of resources for people. And that's what I would really tell people to do. With respect to like, am I deported, right? I think that again is very complicated, but generally as lawyers, we talk about people having been legally ordered deported by a judge or through an administrative process where people weren't able to see a judge, but there's actually like a piece of paper that says you have an order of deportation, right? And we also talk about people who've been physically removed from the United States as being deported, right? Before either of those things, we see people who are without immigration status, right? So you can think about people in kind of these different buckets, and where you are on that continuum is also going to impact what kinds of options you have. So I'm sorry for the lawyer answer, but the lawyer answer is people need an individualized assessment.
Okay, thank you so much. It is kind of frustrating because I think we want blanket answers, but they're just not, it's not possible. And then also many of us work at schools where they're just like, we don't know, we can't help you. Go find a lawyer and pay for it yourself. Okay, there are a lot of questions that come in. There's only 2 minutes left. I'm gonna highlight this question. I'm gonna batch them together. So there's a question and several people pinged saying that they also share it. If we see something in the street, all we can do is document. And then another question, which I think is somewhat related, is what can be done in cases where ICE or other cops act in ways that are illegal or just trample the rights of people being affected?
Yeah, so I think I would say you can document. Like that's it's not all you can do is document. Documentation that can be extremely powerful, both in terms of later trying to vindicate somebody's legal rights and for broader advocacy purposes. One of the things, we highlighted the resources of the Immigrant Defense Project a lot. We highlighted some resources from the Center for Constitutional Rights. Both of those organizations have really worked to try and help people understand how disturbing and upsetting these ICE practices are that are funded by our tax dollars, that are supposedly done in our name. And so I think that documentation is a big, can have like a huge impact. I think in terms of like what to do after with that documentation, right? Again, I think I saw a question that was, can I ask the person who's being detained their name? I would not actually do that. right? I don't think that it's a good idea to ask people to volunteer information about themselves in front of an ICE officer or another law enforcement agent, right? I think you have to think about other creative ways to figure out who that was and what's happening. And for kind of reference, you know, I think Geeta has probably done way more of this than I have. Like, lawyers use those documentation in court, either in the case of an individual or sometimes to show a widespread practice, to create kind of to get orders from judges and agreements from ICE and trainings from ICE for ICE officers that kind of stop the ongoing nature of these egregious practices. And so, again, I would say it's not just, it's like, it's actually an extremely, extremely valuable thing to do, is to not only record it, but make sure that it gets to the kinds of people who are organizing to stop it.
Yeah, I just want to amplify that. Don't put it on social media. You have to give it to a local organization that's actually working on the issues. So in Chicago, it's ICER and OCAD. In your community, it will be a different organization. But the point is to get it to the people who can actually mobilize around the documentation. It's not about sharing it to get likes or whatever. Okay, we are at 3 o'clock. I know that there are so many questions that came in, and they're really important questions. There were a couple of requests to see the slide deck. I'm not sure if y'all are willing to do that, but would it be possible for me to forward the questions that we're collecting and see if we could maybe come up with a follow-up document? I don't know if you have capacity. I know you all are very, very busy.
Yeah, you can, we'll do as best we can. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you all so much again. And thank you everyone who is here. Wow, we have almost 150 people here. I hope that this information was empowering to you and that will help facilitate your organizing. I hope that you will support the work of our organizers who are here. I'm gonna just put this in here again. You can make a donation to the Surveillance Resistance Lab. That would be very helpful. I don't know if y'all have noticed, but streams of funding are drying up for our most radical organizers. And so we need to mutual aid this. So you benefited from this training, please give back a little bit. That would be so great. Any other words, Mizue, Geeta, Marie, that you would like to share?
Just thanks people for caring, seriously. It's really important to build together. And I think also just to this point that it's really thinking about safety as a community practice, and like, you know, the lessons, the things that Marie and Geeta shared, it's not nothing to care in these times, and to learn as much as you can on how to maximize. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you, Mizue, Geeta, and Marie, truly for all the labor that you put into this and for sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you so much.